I was finally asked to talk about the Phil Robertson thing, and after reading all the articles, I was scratching my head like, what? We have an educational system that is completely in shambles. We have 1 out of every 2 heterosexual marriages that are completely destroyed, and this is what Phil Robertson wanted to talk about. Really? Why don't we talk about the educational system instead? Go ahead, walk into a fast food joint one of these days. Half the clerks won't be able to count your change. We have assistant managers that work in those places that do not know, some of them do not know, what a $2 bill is. We actually have a $2 bill. They don't even know it. Go around, survey some of the American population. You'll be amazed to find out how few of them know what our rights are, that have ever read our American Constitution. And we don't have an educational problem? I think we got an educational problem. If the church really wants to fix something, why don't we start with that? Do you know that that's the number 1 reason why heterosexual marriages fail is because of finances? That's right. And those finances are a direct result of unemployment. Why are these people unemployed? Because they lack the skills necessary to get high-paying, gainful employment. It's just a fact. You can't be an accountant without accounting skills. You can't be a doctor without doctor skills. You can't be a mechanic without mechanical skills. And I could go on and on and on. We need to run adult ed in every single church across the country 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in order to fix our economy. Because if we don't fix our economy now, we aren't going to have an economy later on. And what about our military? We keep this up, we will no longer have an effective military either. How's that for a big thing? Let me tell you something. There are countries overseas that do not like us. It's sad, but it's true. We need to maintain an effective military, and if we keep losing out on our educational system, our military is going to go to dust. That's the way it's going to work. It's sad, but it's true. So, I say, we need to continue focusing on our educational system and let's get that fixed before we do anything else. And I would tell Phil Robertson that to his face if he was right in front of me right now. Having said all that, I will give a little my own commentary on this. I see far too many Christians using Genesis chapter 18 as some kind of a driver's license to pummel every single person with an alternative lifestyle. It's absurd, it's ridiculous, and it's not being very helpful. It also sends the wrong message to everybody in the United States and all over the world. You know what it says? It says our God is so weak and so pathetic that he cannot take care of his own affairs, and we have to take care of it for him. God doesn't want us doing that. Period. Okay? God can very much handle his own affairs. If you don't believe me, read 1 Samuel chapter 5. Trust me, God can take care of his own affairs. The second thing I want to point out in Genesis chapter 18 was that those people were guilty of the sin of adultery. Okay? Just because God numbers homosexuality in adultery doesn't mean that that's all they were practicing. Let me tell you something. Sodom and Gomorrah were flourishing towns. That means that those people, those women were still having babies. That meant that they were practicing bestiality, polygamy, homosexuality, you name it, they were practicing all of this. Now back then, they didn't have psychiatric hospitals, they didn't have doctors, they didn't have teachers and jails and all that other stuff. And because of that, God finally had to wipe them all out. But that was God's decision. Not our decision, that was God's decision. God can wipe out people like that, and then again, he can choose not to. Look at John chapter 7. We have an adulterous lady And instead of killing her, which he had every right and every means to do so, he let her go and forgave her. It's all part of God's plan, not our plan. See what I mean? So, another thing that people have forgotten was that Genesis chapter 18 was God's stance on all forms of adultery. And this was presented before the Decalogue was presented to the Israelite people by Moses. Okay? Abraham came before Moses. That's just a fact. Now the thing is, another fact that was overlooked in all this is that God wanted all adultery to be purged from the Israelite camp in the Old Testament. He didn't tell his Israelites to go into every other camp. He didn't say, hey, look, go in the camp of the Philistines and just wipe out every adulterous person that you find. He never said that. What's the message? The message is that we are to clean up our church houses. Let's not worry about what goes on in other people's houses. It's only our houses we should be worried about. Let's clean up our houses, not their houses. They have their houses, we have our houses. We just have to make sure our houses remain holy and clean. That's the way it works. Let me tell you something. Let's go back to Jesus and the money changers. Which temple did Jesus enter into? Not those pagan temples. He entered the temple of Jerusalem and cleaned up that house. That was his house. He had every right to clean up his house. And that's what he did. You see what I mean? And you say, well, how do we translate this into modern times? Well, we can associate with people with alternative lifestyles. That's not a problem. We just don't want them as our roommates. Okay? As long as they're not living with you, you're fine. Are you kidding me? St. Paul, he preached all over the place. He didn't care what those people were doing in those pagan temples. He didn't even bother them. That's right. When Paul was doing all his preaching, he was not bothering those that were going to the pagan temples. He was surrounded by homosexuals. Are you kidding me? The Roman Empire had tons of homosexuals. Did Paul pummel them? No, he didn't. It wasn't necessary. All Paul was worried about was what was going on in the synagogues and what was going on in the Christian churches and the houses. You know, the houses that housed all the Christians. He was worried about what was going on in their houses, not what was going on in the pagan temples. He could have cared less. And that's the same attitude that we Christians should have. And I love how these Christians say, well, we shouldn't hire homosexuals. Why not? Go ahead, hire them. Okay? There's nothing wrong with that. They're not living with us, so hire them. Pay them for what they do. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Look, if you want to be Christian, be distinctive. That's the way it works. Put a menorah on your lapel. Put a Star of David on your lapel. Shoot, put a menorah and a Star of David in your store window. That's distinctive. You see? Make the grievance between the homosexual and God, not between the homosexual and you. That's wrong. Christians are not to have a grievance with homosexuals. If they have a problem with God, that's their business with God. That has nothing to do with you whatsoever. And as long as Christians maintain that, then we'll get along just fine. The only thing that a Christian is supposed to do is make sure that homosexuality doesn't enter into their houses. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. The whole idea is that the Christian is not to be a homosexual, not to stand there and pummel homosexuals. You see the difference? I know that's a lot of teaching. Hopefully you all got the right message. The Christian is to be the one the most picked on. The Christian is not to be remembered as the person who picked on everybody else. That's the difference. Alright, I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.